Hello, everyone. So today, hold on, let me make sure my microphone is on. Yes. Hello, everyone. It is Lainey with Young at Art, and today we are going to be focusing on learning how to draw bodies. Now that's kind of a very intimidating task. It's definitely not, it seems very complicated. It's a lot of parts, a lot of pieces, but we're going to break it down pretty easily and we're going to just put it all together. So you can just use, I recommend just using a pencil for this because we're going to do a lot of erasing. There's a lot of little steps that you're just going to want to make sure that you're going to end up undoing, or there's a lot of places to like mess up, and that's totally okay. This is not a super, super easy topic. So we're going to start with just kind of the basics. So the normal rule is there is something called the 8-head rule, which is basically a body should be about 8 heads tall. If you're doing fashion design, it's called the 9-head rule. I personally don't like this. I think that it isn't the most effective way, but it's a good kind of way to map out what you're doing. So I've drawn one head, and this is about it's about the size of it. So I have it in my head that my body will be about 8 of these. In my personal style, it ends up being closer to about 6, because I like to make the head a little bigger to make it to just show the expressions. I tend to draw bigger eyes, more exaggerated features. So just taking that rule into account, we're going to actually start with we're going to start with the head, and we're just going to start working down. So I've drawn a very basic head. My T-line is very off, just a circle line, kind of basics. So we're going to start with extending that and drawing the neck. Now what I like to do is I end my neck segment with the V, and so this is where your collarbones would be, and that's a good place to map. So I put a little V here. I tend to make it a little bolder, and then I draw these kinds of shapes to reinforce where the collarbones are. I'm just going to do that and pull them up here. And then so normally the normal measurements are your shoulders are about double of your hair, I think it is. So it's like if I draw hair out here, it's normally like double this. I tend to also not follow this rule as much. I just don't really like how it looks. But it's a good kind of measurement, or you can line your shoulders up with the ends of the hair. So we're gonna end about, I like it here, and I'm marking it with 2 circles. And that's just me adding a little bit of where I would shade the neck. Okay, so now that we've gotten this, we are going to make a pretty large square, and this is going to be the chest. And I'm going to make this really boxy at first, and I'll show you why. So I also need to make these a little bit bigger because these are where shoulders would go. So looking at the chest, I'm starting with this really big boxy shape. And you're just going to start with that. And that's like, this shape represents the chest, just bare details. And like the basic shape of it. But as we know, we're not super boxy up here. So what I like to do is take it in and just basically smooth out the edges. I also am going to make more of a V shape to help define the waist. So I'm just kind of bringing it in. I'm going to use my eraser and erase these like sharp edges, because your torso and your chest naturally tapers inwards. It doesn't it goes in for the most part. So the next step to building the basic human form is the waist. So your waist is, I'm putting another box that's connected, and I'm pulling the sides inwards. So it's a little more, it's not an exact like rectangle, but it is, but it is basically in that shape. So we're just gonna pull that inwards. And then we've reached the hips and legs. So this one is a weirder shape because it's not, the way I normally map out my bodies is this like weird trapezoid, this, and then I just kind of fill in where I think the legs would be. There's not really an exact method to my madness for it. This is just how I kind of model it. So for this shape, we're going to acknowledge the hips, which is basically just here. And then it's more of a trapezoid state. And think of where I'm putting these circles here to mark where the top of the legs would be. Just gonna kind of map that in. And then we're gonna start the legs. So these are our next, I would guess it would be like major part of the body of where measurements come into. So to start this, I'm gonna mark about halfway, this kind of, I'm gonna pull it up a little more. I'm gonna start with mapping out these circles, and then I'm gonna connect it with a line, and this is the thigh. So this circle here is marking where our knee would go. So I'm just gonna do, mine aren't super even. I'm gonna clean it up a bit. Just gonna, yeah, mine aren't super even. That's okay. Not doing super exact. And this length should be, or this length should be about the same down here. So just gonna map, I'm just doing a rough estimate. Yeah, right there. And then I'm going to draw a circle there, and that's going to be our ankle. Gonna mirror this between these two, try to make them about the same length. The ankle goes there. So I'm also tapering the leg in so that it goes in right here and then out. So that is to mark where the knee and the calf are. And you see like these circles here are very rough guidelines. I'm not following them exactly. We're gonna do that. And then I'm just, for feet, I just kind of do broad like triangle shapes. I'm not being super exact with these. But with that, I'm gonna erase this joint. I'm gonna erase both these joints actually. I'm gonna move them down a little because I realized I didn't make them super even. So those are the basics for legs, torso, all of that. We're gonna move on to arms now. I'm gonna move this person over here, and I'm gonna just go fully outwards. So we're going, for this, I'm doing the same method I did on the legs, where I'm just kind of roughly estimating where I would put the elbow. It's about here. And when I get further into, we talk about like poses, there's a very simple way to help figure out this measurement. There is the elbow, and then a little farther, I'm just gonna put that, and that's gonna be our hand. And I'm gonna actually draw out the hand first. Oops, didn't leave myself enough room. Just gonna move that. And so with this, we're gonna have the same kind of tapering on one, but only on one side. And so it kind of goes inward. And you hold your arms out all the way. Something else you can always do is look in a mirror and look at your own self and look at where like there's curves, look at where there's like lines, and look at where like your joints meet and see like how they bend. And I always think it's best to look at like models from real life. I've modeled for my own drawings a lot where I just kind of like take pictures of like how my hands look or like how my arm is bent at a certain way. And that's always helpful for me just because this can get a little muddled because there's so many working parts to it. So this is the very, very basic like way to draw people. It's a lot of just mapping out different shapes. So it's, again, at the top we have this square, at the waist we also have a square, and at the pelvis we also we have more of like, I guess it would be a trapezoid. I'm not really great at geometry. Yeah, like a trapezoid, upside down trapezoid. And then when it comes to the legs, it can also be broken down into just ovals. So it's like, here's an oval here, and here's an oval here that connects here. And then there's another overlapping oval. And then the feet are just more just triangular shapes that I don't think have like a specific shape like they can think of, but it's just, yeah. Those I will admit that I'm not the strongest at drawing feet or shoes, so I kind of just finesse it to a point where I think it looks almost correct. So now we've done that, I'm going to introduce you to another model to drawing people, and specifically when we get into more complicated poses. Because if you're wanting to draw comics or you're wanting to do animation or anything like that, you don't want your character just standing, well, like this all the time. That's kind of weird. So you're gonna start learning how to draw new poses. And I always start with just drawing the head and then doing a very, very loose outline of what I think their body is doing. So if I'm doing something where someone is like running, they're looking backwards, I'm going to just kind of, I'm going to use my guide of my shape guide. I use a lot of circles more than squares, especially when I'm doing like running motion. So I'm going to do oval. I tend to do these very quick sketches with a lot of very loose lines. It's kind of messy. And just to map out my shapes and what I'm trying to do. And I recommend everyone kind of do that first, of just making super messy shapes and just getting familiar with like how to make like a human form. Something like this. And it's really a learning process. But for something like this, a method that I like is something called the bean. So you can also break apart like your like abdomen and chest and waist by drawing this kind of bean shape. So this is a really easy method, and I think it's a really fun method to initially practice with. So we're going to draw this kind of bean shape first, and you're going to choose whichever way you want it to go. I'm going to go this way. Okay, now that we have our bean, I'm going to draw the head, and I'm going to just start connecting. I'm going to draw 2 circles here. And then I'm just going to start, I'm going to draw some circles for the arms. We're going to start with the arms. I'm also going to start bringing in the waist more. We're just going to finesse that. So a method, if you're not sure where, so I think I'm going to put my hands about here. And something you can do with that, so you're going to draw the shoulder first, and that's just, I put it as a circle. And you're going to connect these with a line. Now that's not going to be where your arm is, because obviously your arm would be bent, or it's just really, otherwise it's just kind of weird. So we're going to zoom in on this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a 90-degree angle. And I'm going to draw a circle here. And that's actually where your elbow will be. And it helps you make more dynamic arm poses and makes sure it looks even. So you draw this line, you make a point in the middle, and then you just start connecting it. So then I'm going to do that again on this side. I'm putting the hand up here. So here's my shoulder blade. The collarbones would be here. So I want to put one hand up here. I'm going to draw that 50. I'm going to draw that line connecting them at the 90-degree angle. At the end, put the circle, and then fill in my hand. And there we got the arm. And this also works with the legs as well. So I do a wider circle at the hip because they're a little longer. If you your pelvis and your hips are a little longer than like are a little larger than your shoulder blades. But you can do that here too. So if I do like a running motion, I want this leg to be going forward. This pose is very weird. I didn't think about it ahead of time. But I know that I want the foot probably to be about here. I'm gonna just, oh no, I want it behind. Oops. We'll put the foot there. So I'm gonna connect it at that 90-degree angle at the point. And then I'm just gonna connect them. So this is just the very, very basic start. It doesn't look super great, but it also helps you just get out of the kind of fear of drawing bodies. So I'm going to draw the hip here, put the foot out here, connect, just find the middle point. And there you go. This is a weird pose, but that's okay. And then when you get into it, once you get kind of into it, you can start adding clothes, you can start adding details, and also start fixing up some proportions if it looks a little wonky. I'm going to delete this other bean because I don't really need it. But yeah, that's the basis of the bean method. And I think it's a really good one if you're just trying to get more comfortable drawing bodies. If you're just if you're a little intimidated by breaking it up into 3 sections, the bean, you can pretty naturally make a form out of it and it will be pretty correct, or it will look pretty human, and then you can just kind of refine that method. I think it's one that's really good if you're working with more extreme poses, if you're just trying to get better at breaking out of your shell, or if you're just, again, a little more insecure about it. I think it's always a good method to try. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to break it apart more. We're going to try to draw a full figure, full form. You can also go into drawing clothes. So I'm going to do something pretty basic, and I'm going to do a standing form. So I'm going to start with my head. I'm going to do my little T line. And I always like to form the full head. I know a lot of people don't. They'll just do the basic T line and know how to attach it from there. I personally like to do this. Whatever works for you. I'm not here to change your entire art style. So I'm going to start with my neck again. I like to shade in. I don't know why. It just makes me feel like I've done something impressive. So now I've come so there's a muscle here called I believe it's called your trapezius. So basically when your neck meets your shoulders, it's not just neck then shoulders. There's a little slope here because that's another muscle that connects everything together. And so it's really important that when you're drawing your neck, you add this little detail because it fills in the space of where your neck and your shoulders meet. So something you can do is when you've drawn your neck is and you've done this little triangle, is you can come back up and just add this little concave shape in, and that helps add more realism to your drawing or add more detail. So I've started with the basics. I've got my neck. I've added where the shoulders connect. I'm actually going to darken this color, and so you can see where I'm going to put my collarbones. So we're going to put right at the base here, and then gonna ignore this, and I'm going to come up a little higher. I'm going to start my collarbones right here. This is where they're going to connect to the shoulder. And then make this a little bigger. There we go. So now that I've done that, I'm going to add my square shape again. And I'm going to immediately just kind of cut in where the corners are, and you can do that as well. I'm going to add a little indent up for a marker of the waist. And then for my waist shape, I'm also going to do that where I'm going to mark it down. So my waist shape is more of like a triangle almost. It's a really rounded, kind of not great triangle. Don't submit that to your geometry teacher and say this is a triangle. It's not right. And so also with this shows something called the line of movement. So with how I'm going to model this character, I'm gonna finish it and then I'll explain the line of movement. But basically it has a more fluid shape to it. So it has a little more life to it. So I'm gonna add that. I'm gonna add my upside down trapezoid here, mark where the hips are. Oops, accidentally zoomed in. And then, so what I'm gonna do, I've gotten this down. I'm gonna start on the legs. And something I'm going to consider is where this person's weight is being held. And by that, I mean, when you're standing, do you ever like prop a hip out and like realize you have more weight on one leg than the other? Or have you ever been standing and you realize like you're like when you're leaning against something, or how you tend to bear weight on one leg more than the other? Or you like shift, and so one leg ends up being more relaxed and one leg ends up being like a little more straight and heavy. And that's what you're gonna start considering. So what I'm gonna do with this one is I'm gonna have her leaning on something. So I'm going to put the weight, if she's leaning, I'm gonna make her lean on this side. So that means the weight is on this leg and not on this leg. So what I'm going to do is this leg is going to actually come inwards more. So I'm going to mark where my knee is. And so it's going to come, sorry, I didn't mark that out. I just kind of went into autopilot. Oh, did I do this right? Well, we'll figure it out. So I'm going to have her leaning on this leg, and then this one, when I work on it, I'm actually going to, there's my knee. I'm going to bring it inwards, because if it's just on the toes, if I bring the leg up and show that it's bent and that the weight is here, it's not on the full foot. And that's how to create the illusion of like weight bearing. If you have one leg bent, it helps show that the weight is instead on this one, because you are able to bend it, and that means that the weight is just in the toes instead of like, or the ball of the foot, that's the right word, not your toes, instead of like flat across through the entire foot, if that makes sense. But with that, we're gonna start with the arms next. So I want her leaning, so I'm going to draw my hand, which is just a really boxy shape. I'm not going to draw a full hand. Gonna do my little trick where I connect here and here. I'm going to draw that 90-degree angle. And there's the circle. Here's the arm. And here's, and then just connect those. We're just going to add an imaginary ledge there. And then for this arm, I'm just going to have it laying straight. And so with that, if you're just drawing an arm just like hanging, and there's no real guidelines like there is here where there's a bend and you need to figure that out, what you can remember is the basic guidelines are your elbows will hit at your waist and your hands hang roughly at your mid thigh. So that's something to consider, and also to help not need as many guides is just knowing these kinds of these weird little basic measurements of like where your elbows naturally hit, or where your hands naturally hit. It's just all weird, some weird details. So now that I've had that, I'm gonna erase my little guides here. I don't need them anymore. Just fill them in. Also gonna erase these ones. If at any point you got lost, you can go back, you can pause, you can just figure it all. You can take your time. This isn't a super easy thing. It took me years to get to a point where I can draw a body quickly. So no rush and no worries if this is a little more complicated. It is, it's not a super easy like concept to grasp, especially just in like 40 minutes. So don't worry if you're kind of struggling with it. It's something that takes a lot of practice. So now I'm just going to start adding details. I'm going to add some hair, some face, and I can go over faces again. So I'm just going to add my nose at my T line. Doing my anime eyes. And this is just where you get to have your own creativity. But oh yeah, I was going to talk about line of motion. So what we can see here, I'm going to draw this on different layers so it doesn't impact my. So from the top of the head to the end of to the bottom of the foot, there is, because I put weight on this leg, essentially there is a line of motion. So she's not standing straight on. Instead, it's this more fluid motion that goes from here to here, where you can see these curves, and it helps create the illusion of something a little more lifelike. Oops, didn't want to change the blue. And that's also really important if you're when we're doing character design. And again, if you're drawing comics or you're doing any of that, it's really helpful to acknowledge the line of motion and gives your characters a little more depth. So I'm gonna add her hair to help add to that fluid motion. If I give her like some fun pants, we're gonna do that. But if I were to give her let me give her like a fun little pirate shirt. And I just had some puffy sleeves. This isn't super great clothes drawing, but I'm not doing a clothes drawing tutorial. But something I can do is if her like her shirt is tucked into her pants, is kind of bunch it up, and then that helps add to the motion that it's going this way. And it helps go with her design and her shape. It makes it look a little more cohesive. And there's a bunch of ways to do that, to make your designs cohesive and lifelike, and also to not go against the motion. So I have everything, instead of putting her hair like going this way, I have it going this way to help add to the motion that that the weight is on this leg, and she's the curve goes this way. Hope that makes sense. You can kind of see it if I draw out the arrows here. But it's good to know where your figures are leaning, or which way, or like, and how you're incorporating motion into that, because it's not that's always kind of difficult, and that's okay. So we're just gonna clear that. So I would like you all to experiment with posing and that idea of line of motion. So you can do, what I recommend you do is just start sketching out, start with the head. Don't do anything too detailed, but start with the head, add a neck, and then just add the shapes that I was talking about. So we got this, we got the square of the waist, the upside down trapezoid, and then just start connecting the dots and connecting different things, just to work with getting this like fluid form. And something else you can try is starting with just drawing the line of motion. So I'm going to do like this big S form, and I'm going to go to this darker color. So I'm going to part the head here. And how am I going to get my person to have this line of motion. So I'm going to start with drawing my kind of basic shapes. They're going to be tucked up a little. We're doing a lot of curving and bending of the shapes. And so I'm going to put one leg up here, put one leg down here. I'm going to just start kind of just finessing where I want different things. But this is another great exercise to help you get not stuck or have your art be stagnant. Basically, just an exercise that's really fun is just drawing like this shape or this shape or these just kind of wavy shapes, and then putting people on like, and then drawing your forms over it and making them abide by the line and keeping that sense of motion. And it's kind of difficult, but that adds like kind of a fun extra dynamic of how to make things fluid and have motion and have and just also again get you more familiar with drawing like a person's form, because ultimately getting comfortable with drawing people is like the first part of the battle of learning how to draw people. It's just getting comfortable with it and knowing like how to stretch and how to like break the rules and like where you can break the rules, because when you get into drawing comics or when you get into animation or anything like that, you're gonna learn like, hey, sometimes I need to greatly exaggerate a form and I need to stretch it out, and you need to know the limits of it. Or like, how do I get something to look this way? And I always recommend looking at like fashion magazines or like any kinds of like clothing photo shoots and seeing how those people are posed and modeled. I think it's a really great one. One that I do is I actually go on to like H&M's website, or I go, I forgot, there's some really good like clothes modeling places where I get to see people's poses and I get to see how they wanted to show the clothes. And that's something that can also help you learn how to draw fabrics, is if you're looking at these like life examples and then learning how to stylize them or make them more cartoony. I always think that's a really good method to learning like how to draw slightly more complicated forms. So I'm going to do this again. So I'm going to just, my line is going to go the opposite of this one. I want to draw someone standing this time, so I'm going to put their head here. So I'm kind of thinking is like this cool pose. This isn't exactly what I thought I was going to be doing. Oops. See, and it's not, as you saw with that mistake, it's not always super clean or exact, but it's just breaking you out of like being too stagnant. I've actually made the legs way too long, one leg way too long, and that's okay. It's gonna come back to it. And even though it's not exactly on the motion line, it's still going with the flow because it still meets later down here. Got someone. But yeah, this is just a fun way to kind of experiment and get used to drawing people and forms. And I wanted the back should have been curved. That's what I did wrong. Oops. It's like, why doesn't this look right? Oh, sometimes also eventually you will get the eye for it of realizing like, hey, that's not right. Or what's a little wrong here? For me, it was just, I forgot to curve the back and pull it in this way. Said I was pushing it out, so it was going forward. I wanted it to be going back, so I'm just gonna do that. But yeah, I really, this is just a fun little method. I recommend you just keep doing this and working with line of motion, working with exaggeration, working with just getting familiar altogether with the forms. And then when you get a little further along and you're not just drawing like these faceless forms, you can start thinking about character design and thinking about like what clothes you want to put on to your characters, or like what design helps um like amplify the design or help amplify the line of motion, or things that could be dynamic and just cool. I really recommend looking at different like clothes websites, or like different like magazines, or like if you're like going in a store and you see like how the mannequins are posed. Like there's a bunch of places to look in real life to help you get familiar with like poses and fabric, and like more unique ways to pose your characters, or like things that could be really cool in a comic. And you can get inspiration from really anywhere, and I really recommend that. And I think it can be always really helpful to look and draw from real life. Trying to think if there's any good online resources. I can't really think of any right now. Yeah, so just keep working on it. And again, if any of these were a little confusing, you can always go back and you can always start over. This is again a complicated topic. There's a lot of moving parts when it comes to arms and legs and exaggeration and torso, and how far can a human person like bend and twist, and like how you can how do you like work with these different things. And that's okay. And it's not, again, it took me quite a few years to get to a point where I can just kind of draw a body with ease, and I know like how far, like where to put the lines to imply that they're like moving that way. It's not a super, and I still also get into the like uh crutch of just drawing people standing completely still, which isn't as fun. Or I tend to do like these poses. Um, but it's always good to just, again, just draw and work and get familiar with it. So I hope you had a good time learning about drawing bodies and learning about drawing people. And again, it's don't ever beat yourself up if it's a little more challenging than you expected, or you're not getting it right away. It's not something that you can like easily, I don't think it's something that I could easily like pick up right from the get-go. So just working and understanding is the first challenge, and just comprehending. Again, that's the first battle. And once you can take that on, and once you start getting comfortable, it will start coming more naturally. And that's where you want to be. You want to be at a point where you can draw naturally and relaxed and not stress out about everything. So yeah, again, I would keep working on something you can do in your free time, or just whenever, for an exercise, is drawing these lines and putting people over them and seeing how you can get them to adapt to these forms and have these like fun lines of motion, and eventually add them to a scene and start working on like composition and seeing how this works. But yeah, I hope you had a good time drawing with me. Um, I hope you all have a lovely day, and I hope you enjoyed um, learning about this. And I'm sure you all did an absolutely wonderful job. So, yeah, I hope you all have a wonderful day.